be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of those pieces of legislation which, and I'm only going to confine my comments to the Accounting Infrastructure Reform Bill. The other bills are, of course, the same, supported by the Labor opposition, but the legislation is relatively straightforward. It did, and I do agree with the Minister, that it does bring the accounting firms in accounting practice in New Zealand and Australia closer together in similar ways to what has been done by both governments over many years in terms of trans-Tasman commercial arrangements in the banking and legal entities and sectors. It will indeed promote a far more efficient scheme of arrangement and better business outcomes, I think, for that profession, and it is supported in large part by the accounting sectors both here and the CPA in Australia. That being said, as I said last night when we last dealt with this, we did have some difficulties, or not so much some difficulties, but we did probe officials around a number of areas, charities and the impact of the legislation on the charitable sector, which I think was a concern shared by both sides of the House. I think Mr Young was the chair of the committee, because we didn't want to impose undue difficulties or costs on the charitable sector. I think we worked through those issues pretty well. There was also the thorny issue of the religious objection clause, and the committee, I think, tested out officials, and the motivation was not to test out, if you will, the religious notions of the particular group of submitters, the brethren who came before us, but it was to ensure that bluntly, and I know this may sound reasonably humorous, but it's not, that we weren't setting up a situation where bureaucrats were having to make religious judgments, as it were, bluntly, and we weren't setting up a situation where nefarious folks could use the exemptions that are in the legislation to somehow walk around the legislation and the rules in terms of membership and the obligations that membership and the entity governing it would entail. And there was quite a lengthy scrutiny of officials, and officials were sent away to deal with that issue. There are indeed a number of precedents. The one that I recall reasonably vividly is the amendments or the Labour Relations Act amendments that were made going back many, many years, where that particular scheme of arrangement and exemption was allowed. And in respect of the brethren, I note for the record that both Damien O'Connor and myself actually ended up getting a meeting with the then Labour Minister Margaret Wilson to make the case for that particular group that they should be able to exercise, or that exemption should be extended in the new and amended legislation. I have to say, in passing, Mr Speaker, that little did we know what that particular sect was up to, and neither did the public in terms of as a principle, and neither did the public realise that they were trying to buy an election with $1 million and put a knife in the throat of our democracy. But putting that aside, the officials that we were grateful for, and I think both sides of the House worked through the issue in a bipartisan way, and I would hope, and we have sought assurances in the committee stage from the Minister, that that particular exemption clause could not be abused. We hope that is the case. To be fair, in other pieces of legislation, it's worked pretty well. The bill, sir, and the main provisions deal with reducing restrictions on legal form of audit firms, charity assurance, members of accredited bodies performing statutory audits, qualified accountants performing statutory accounting roles, and a number of amendments in respect of the New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants. I think it is appropriate that the House keep dealing, and I'm glad to hear the Minister say that there is further legislation to come in terms of the Trans-Tasman relationship. These are our closest neighbours. These are Australia is effectively one of, if not the biggest market we have. We have had CER for many, many years. We are getting closer and closer as one market, and business is being transacted in more modern ways with a greater frequency. So it is appropriate that these pieces of legislation are progressed through to make it more efficient and easier for the commercial sector on both sides of the Tasman to transact business. I would say in passing also that it does, and this is no sort of disrespect to the new Minister, but it is a bit of a worry that on the one hand the government says these measures form part of its growth and business agenda, but on the other hand they took out the portfolio of commerce from within the Cabinet. They didn't downgrade it within the Cabinet, they took it right out of the Cabinet, and not only downgraded it outside the Cabinet, they dropped it to the basement, or close probably to the political dunny, to number 25. And this is the Minister of Commerce we're talking about. Now, we've had some substantial Ministers of Commerce on both sides of the House that have made substantial contributions. I'm thinking of Simon Power, Leanne Dalzell, and with a bit of luck, Paul Goldsmith might get there. As long as his performance is a bit better than he was chairing the Select Committee, but he may well get there. Yep, he's on probation. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Fair game. We'll give him the 90-day rule. We'll give him that. But I just say, sir, it is a bit of a contradiction and a bit of a worry when the Minister of Commerce is dropped to that, even to the darker depths of where Maurice Williamson was dropped once or twice, I suspect, but is dropped right outside a Cabinet. What signal does that send to commercial entities? Because we know it is, there are priorities in government. I've been a Cabinet Minister inside. We know the more senior you are, generally, the faster you can get things through. If you're not in the ring, it is harder to do. And this piece of legislation and these other pieces of legislation and future pieces of legislation, it seems, won't have the priority that they once did. Now, we know that Minister Foss took an inordinate amount of time within the Cabinet to drag commerce legislation through the process and through this House. Maybe, sadly, that's one reason why he was bounced. But that should not have been the case, Mr Speaker, for the portfolio that is commerce. It is slightly odd that the government does wax on about its support for the commercial sector, which we all support, the need for creating greater efficiencies, which appropriate efficiencies we support, its need to cut through red tape, cut through regulatory frameworks, which appropriately we do support, but then you take the Minister and the portfolio and you bump them right down to the most junior of junior ministerial portfolios right outside the Cabinet. I just wonder what signal that sends. It'd be great if speakers who are going to speak for this bill would get up and give us some sort of an assurance that that doesn't mean that appropriate commerce law or consumer affairs law, but commerce law is going to somehow... Was that you or the bell, Mr Speaker? We may have a problem here. Thank you. Is there a doctor in the house? Is there a doctor in the house?
Yes, there is.
At the risk of being thrown out. But what signal does that send to the commercial sector? Does this mean that commerce legislation will be not only delayed through some of the former incompetence, but it will be delayed because it struggles to get the priority it should? If you want to have a business framework and you want to grow business and you want to do things to help the commercial sectors, surely that was one portfolio that should have remained not only within the Cabinet, but at a senior level within the Cabinet. Simon Power, as Minister of Commerce, I recall, I think was number 3 or number 4 at worst. Sat on the front row, got his legislation through, got it through swiftly, and much of that legislation, to be fair to him, was positive, and it was supported by this House. Now it's sort of, there's no impact players, they're on the bench, you know, the water boy or the orange boy or whatever has got the portfolio and that's where it sits. So I say, sir, we do support the legislation. It is a good piece of legislation. It went through in a good process through the Commerce Committee. But I just hope, sir, when we look at the priorities of the government, we've got lots of commercial guys over there, I hope they'll go and have a chat to the Leader of the House or the Prime Minister and still promote commerce legislation to a high priority as it has been in the past. Mr Loroanga says we will. I'll hold him to that. We wait and see.
Brett Hudson.
Thank you,